We start with the paradox that there have been countless ingenious technological innovations for the last 200 years, and the last 50 years especially, that are designed to save us time. Remarkable inventions. Somehow the result has been that nobody has any time left. Why? What is that all about? Wherever I speak to people and I ask them, how many of you have lots of free time on your hands? Almost nobody, not even children. So that's why I called it the new poverty. We're a time-poor society. We have lots of things, and maybe, although much less now, maybe lots of money, but lots of time, no. So why? What's happened to us? Why are we always feeling pressed for time and agitated about it? And that's the problem is, how do I do everything? How do I live up to all my commitments? How do I get things done? How do I handle all the interesting projects or all the obligations or all the, how do I squeeze it all in and still have meaningful time left for my family, for whatever? So it's a great suffering, this problem of time in our culture and throughout the modern world, I think. And then the mystery of time is very much deeper than, in a way. It goes back since any recorded history, since people have been thinking about the meaning and purpose of their lives, why they're on Earth, what they're supposed to be doing, who they are, who we are, and above all, why do we live, why do we die? What is this? What is time at all is a huge mystery. Nobody knows what it is, really. And yet, it's our life. And it's a mysterious question. Why? What is this thing that we have beginning, middle, end? We come into being, we pass out of being. Everything, more or less, has that property of being temporal, in time. Except, so they say, the eternal, whatever that is, which we can talk about. So the mystery of time is the mystery of our life, our human life, who we are. It's connected with who we are, what we're meant to be. Why do we live? Why do we die? Why do we suffer? There is not a single deep question that is not inhabited by the question of time. So we have these two sides, the problem and what I'm calling the mystery. The problem is something to be solved, to be worked with, to be ingenious about, to be fixed, as every people try to do. There's all kinds of time-saving devices. There's schedules and plannings and how to schedule your time, how to economize your time, et cetera, et cetera. This is a problem. Problems are meant to be solved, but mysteries are meant to be experienced, to be pondered, to be lived with, to let the mystery come into the human heart, the human soul. The culture, our culture in general, although this is probably true in a way of every culture, every society, but our culture has a unique way of looking at what a human being is. And I don't think it started out that way, but somehow we've come to believe that we're mainly people who need pleasure in our life, need things to give us comfort, pleasure, need certain achievements to give us a sense of self-respect. Money, for example, to give us a sense of value and self-respect. We need physical well-being, and then not only just health in some kind of a normal sense, but appearance. We need to appear a certain way. We need to, in other words, what the Buddhists call the desire nature, the satisfactions of desires, is for many of us the meaning of happiness. And so to satisfy desires, we have an industry, a capitalism, an economic, not just needs, but desires. And so one of the things we have to understand about the problem of time is the proliferation of desires. There's a very big difference in principle between needs and desires. You could say physical needs are rather simple in a way, but that doesn't mean we should live sort of with fig leaves around us or something. It means there's a certain kind of need that corresponds to something essential in human nature, and it's not just physical survival, although that has been overemphasized very much, but it's also many things about the finer aspects of the human psyche that we need to cultivate. We'll come into that later. But then we have to recognize that the economic principle of our society has been the creation of desire in recent years, in not just satisfaction of need and desire, and that's one thing, but in order to keep the particular economy moving, more and more products have to be invented, more and more things have to be bought, more and more desires have to be created. So we've become a society of consumers that can never get enough, because the desire nature, as the great teachings of the past tell us, the desire nature is never satisfied for very long. The more it gets, the more it wants. And it's not that there were people twirling their mustaches behind the scenes saying, how can we make life more and more meaningless while we're making it seem more and more meaningful? But that's more or less what happened. You see thousands of toothpaste or 100 kinds of cat food, or even cats' desire nature has to be taken into account now. But when you think of all the products that are being offered that make people, that are marketed in a way that make young people and older people and all of us feel safer, more beautiful, more lovable, more et cetera, better than the other guy. This is an industry that's feeding off, provoking more and more desires. And that eats up a lot of our time, getting things, doing things, trying to get more and more, trying to work more and more, et cetera, et cetera. There's a symbol of that in the Tibetan tradition. It's called the hungry ghost. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there are many levels of beings. Several animals are one, and devils are another, and gods are another, and human beings are very central. But there's one called the hungry ghost. Hungry ghosts are like phantoms with a big belly, and their limbs and their head are floating, sort of hardly connected, but they all around, and they have a big belly and a little pinprick mouth, and they're always hungry, they're always eating, and the more they eat, the hungrier they get, and each time they eat, when it goes down, it burns fiercely, so that I'm craving to eat more and more, and the more I eat, the more hungry I am, and yet each time I eat, it burns. And that, in a way, couldn't be a better summation of, I would say, the last 50, 60 years of capitalism and what it was. Not that I'm against capitalism, but so that takes a lot of time. And that means because it's based on the principle of how we look at a human being. Now, another aspect of how we look at human beings in this general culture of thing, and this is true beyond all cultures in its own way, but here it's particularly pronounced, is that human beings, it is not recognized very much in our society, in our world, that human beings have an inner world and an outer world. We have a side of ourselves that needs to act manifest, to take care of our family, to earn our living, to accomplish things, to invent, to travel, to live, to take care of the earth, to do all sorts of things which human beings can really do remarkably. But there's this inner part, and it's not just the psychological desires and things, but there's an inner life within us which we have lost touch with entirely. And we sometimes experience it, as I said before, in moments of danger, moments of crisis, moments of extraordinary beauty, moments of great love, moments, say, when your child is just born, moments of connection with the loved one, or moments of just sometimes just, you don't know why, but they appear, these moments of what you might call the real or the higher or the real self appears. There's a real self inside there, a real I that's covered over. It hasn't been born. It's not able to appear. And that's our real identity, is connected to that. The thing we call ourselves is been culturally conditioned. It's not that it's bad altogether. It's just a cultural fact, a cultural product of an interaction of outside influences in my own mind and emotional nature and body. That cultural, not a fiction, but that cultural psychological product, you can call it ego if you like, but that has so many loaded meanings nowadays. But it's the surface self, if you like, that we need. We damn well need it in our life. It's important. But there's this other self that we're born to come in touch with, to open to, that really gives life meaning. Without that, we just are like little puppets. We're born, we're conditioned, we get our money, we get our food, we make our babies, and we die. That's it. So time is connected with emphasizing the outer self, the problem of time, to the exclusion of the inner self. Because when that inner self appears, even for a moment, it's a completely new sense of time. Mm-hmm. I am here. The present moment expands. There's no rush. There's no sense that I've got to do this. But being fully present, time changes completely. You could say it's a little shadow of something eternal, if you like. You can call it timeless in the sense. But time is different. That is what the starvation of our culture is. The problem of time and the mystery of time are connected to what you might call the starvation for the present moment. We are starved for the present. We are hungry for it. We don't know it. And when it appears, yes, I see. I'm here. This is real. I become more loving. I become more intelligent. I become quieter in a dynamic way. I become more closer to what I am, and then it disappears because we're not used to it. And there are aspects of this which are very, very interesting, which psychologists have studied. I know it's a kind of a strange thing, but for example, many of us have been close to a fatal or dangerous car accident. You're driving along the road and suddenly a truck has shifted its lanes, or a car has shifted a lane and is coming right at you. You have, by clock time, maybe 2 seconds to react, or you're dead. Well, suddenly, you start doing just the right thing. Something appears, and I'm here now, and it's as though I see my functions operating perfectly. It turns the wheel just in time. Maybe the car turns over. I'm in the car turning over, but the part that's just appeared is not frightened at all. There may be somebody else who's a little frightened at that moment, but I'm there, and I'll never forget that moment. That's the moment. And then maybe after rolling over once and you've missed the car, you've behaved perfectly for 2 or 3 seconds, then maybe afterwards, 4 or 5 minutes, you start thinking about what happened. You're scared to death. At that point, you say, "Oh my God!" But in that moment, You existed in a way you never. Now, what would it be like to be like that in your life more? That is where these moments, and that maybe is a very dramatic moment, but there are other moments with love, looking into the eyes of the beloved, and also just in fact getting off the boat or a plane in a new country, and you're walking around and you're suddenly, well, I'm here, I'm really here. Those moments show us, they're not interpreted very well in ours at all. Those moments are like messages from some place deep, some timeless place within ourselves. They're messages in a way that say, here's who you are. Try to cultivate, try to let me in more. Try to let me into your life, your real self. But that's an aspect of this too. Like if you were under hypnosis, somebody put you under a hypnotic trance and told you were, I don't know, one of the Three Musketeers or something, or Barry Bonds or whatever, whatever. And you started acting, talking, and talking about, reminiscing about your time when you hit 74 home runs or something, or when you were fighting with George Washington at Valley Forge, whatever you were hypnotized into thinking, feeling. And then you stepped out of it. Here I am. This is who I am. Of course, I don't know how it happened that I was just thinking, I felt I was like General Lafayette next to George Washington, or I thought I was Joe DiMaggio or whatever, Marilyn Monroe. And now I see I'm just me. I'm me. And you wake up from a dream, and in the dream you were running for president or something, and now you wake up and, I'm here. So we could say at that moment in the dream and in the hypnosis you had forgotten who you were. Now, when you get swallowed, shall we say, by all the cravings, all the things that you want to do, that you have to do, you absolutely have to get this done. Every time maybe you get hurt, your feelings get hurt, or maybe you get angry, maybe you get sentimental, maybe and all those feel like you at the moment. And maybe something like what we were talking about, maybe your mother walks in with cookies when you're a child or something. You've been playing with your toys, and suddenly, for some reason, you feel, I'm here. I remember myself when I was, this is a bit later on, but when I was about, I don't know what I was, about 12 or maybe 9, walking down the street just as a kid, skipping along, and I went walking down. I remember the beautiful autumn leaves, and suddenly I realized, I'm here, I'm me, I'm Jerry, I am here. And I looked around, so isn't that interesting? I exist. And I see that was me. It was really more I than all the other things I was doing. Then I go back and I walk along and I forget that. I'm lost. Another sense of identity has appeared. And it feels fine that everybody says that's me, that's what people live by. They don't recognize this other thing at all. Or if they do, they make it into something fantastic, something phenomenal, something rather imaginary, the dream of being godlike or something of that kind. And that's a whole other question. How much of this kind of talk that I'm speaking about now, how much of it is really based on reality, and how much of it is based, at the very best, on an idea that I believe in, rather than something I actually taste and experience. That's a whole different question. So, but we're in a world where ideas and concepts and thoughts, our worldview, our view of what a human being is, our view of what's important, our view of how the world grows, of how life appears on Earth. Everything is evolution, for example. Everything is neuroanatomy. Everything is genetic code. Everything is physical basis of reality. Everything is manipulable, every scientifically knowable. That's taken to be implicitly or explicitly. That's what things really are. Or in the social field, everything is financial, is money, is bottom line. That's real, bottom line. Yeah, everything is like that so much in our society, if you know what I'm saying. But then I read a philosophy book, say, or I see a certain film, or listen to a certain kind of music, and then it's like a call from another world. Philosophy, which is my specialty, is really, real philosophy, if I can call it that, is meant to remind us of who we are, really. We're part of a very big universe. It's not just quantitatively large, but it's a universe of purpose and meaning. And it's meant to help us begin to remember who we are, what a human being is, or at least to deeply open that question. And then the question appears, well, then who really are we? What do we, and the term sometimes uses remembering oneself, but what are we? What are we meant to be? What is a human being on earth supposed to do, supposed to be? Is he supposed to be what we said, eat, drink, breakfast, lunch, dinner, children, and that's it, and you die? Or is there something else? Because a human being is so extraordinarily created. It's so extraordinarily organized in a completely different plan than the animals and the plants, great as they are. And that question, to be open that question, to really open it and not just go into all the reduction into biology and economics and all these things, which is so knee-jerk kind of thing going on. To open that question, that's what philosophy does. And when a question like that is really opened, time is a whole different meaning. Is something really in us that is timeless, that is, you could say, immortal, but that makes it sometimes immortality is like lots of linear time. And that's not what the immortality really means. Timelessness, that means now it's not conditioned by the passage of time. Now, what then is the human being supposed to be? So, in my view, and I think it's been taught for centuries, but who understands how to do it? A human being is meant to be a much different kind of person, being, than we are. It meant, put it in very simple words, a human being is meant to serve a higher purpose. It's meant to serve, meant to give, meant to help, meant to be part of what is noble in the universe. I can put it in other language, which may sound sentimental, but the human being is meant to be able to love, not as we usually love, which is just satisfying our desires, which are very good, but a human being is meant to care in a way that comes from another level, from the real I. I see that I don't have any time in my life usually. I'm rushing from one thing to another. But what I'm beginning to realize, and is part of that book, is my emotions that are taking my time away from me. For example, my fears, my neuroses, my imagination, my worries, my jealousies, my need to fix something up that isn't broken. For example, somebody says, I hear that somebody has spoken ill of me. I start imagining all sorts of things. I want to, why did they say that? Or did I do something wrong? Or, and I said, I better take care of that. So I have to try to find a way to see what happened. If I'm lucky, I'll try to find the facts first. But usually one just reacts and says, I'm never going to talk to that guy again. Or you start saying things or doing things that cause all kinds of difficulties, and which you then have to repair further, and you come to the end of the day. You've lost several hours, and it's still not fixed. So finally it fixes. It turns out it was nothing special at all. It was reported wrong. It was my imagination. It was the guy who reported it didn't like the guy to begin with, and it was all an interaction of stupid emotions, that is, egoistic reactivity, that interplayed, interconnected with each other, and at the end of the day, it turns out it was big nothing, and you have turned out your guts on the damn thing for several hours. How many times has this happened? Every day, practically, or every third day, one is taking care of things which are just the creation of emotional reactivity that really have no existence, really, at all. So we live in this, the earth itself. This is what's so strange, is that the earth, nations destroy other nations because of hurt feelings, because of emotions, because of cravings, because of fanaticisms. It's emotions that are the most dangerous thing on this planet. You know, look at what's happening now. You have people with a certain kind of relationship to their religion, ready to kill half the world for it, and the other half also ready to, in its own way, kill. This is emotion. And so that kind of emotion is very destructive, and that destroys time. You know, little things, too. Little things. Then, I had an aim to do something down in my office. I see a magazine. I'm lost. Oh, that's interesting. It's not interesting. Why am I spending all that time looking at the damn magazine? It's entertaining. So entertainment is a thief of time also. I think it's interesting. I think it's important that I know that the penguins are in trouble or something like that. I read all about it suddenly. Do I give my attention to things which really aren't that important for me? It's that interesting. And therefore, the waste of time is the waste of attention. My emotion takes my attention. Now, the attention is the most uniquely human characteristic we have. It's higher and deeper than what we call the mind and the feelings. It's what we have that's really our own. What we give our attention to is what we become. Now, that doesn't mean, this is not a puritanical view that like Benjamin Franklin or somebody says everything you do has to serve a practical purpose. Not at all. There are times when you have to just let it go. You just let your brain go. You let your heart go. You just have fun. But we've made, for example, fun practically as a world principle for many people. Is it fun? We'll do it. Well, fun is pleasant, but is man put on earth to have fun? Is he put on earth to not have fun? No. Fun is a part of it. Pleasure is a part of life. But it's out of balance. So, to say that the thieves of time, I could list almost anything my eyes fall on, eats my time up because I get attached to it, for example. So there's countless examples of thieves of time. So what's the answer to that? It's the state of consciousness that's the problem. When in the state of consciousness of our ordinary lives, we are constantly being distracted by 1,000 things in this world. What are all these magazines living in? We're drowning in magazines, for example. We're drowning in these things I go to my dentist, which I do unfortunately all too often, and I'm sitting in the waiting room where there are tons of magazines, and I'm told, come in to the dentist's office and sit in the chair. He'll be with you in a few minutes. Here's a magazine. I don't need a damn magazine. What am I supposed to? Am I constantly being taken by the outside, stimulated? So we have no inner life. That's why there's so many thieves of time. people think, I sometimes give my class a little assignment. I say, sit down in a chair sometime this week, just sit in the chair. Don't watch television, don't fall asleep, don't read a book, don't smoke anything, just sit there. Try to do it for, say, 5 minutes. Don't dream, try not to dream, try not to just daydream. Just sit in a chair for 5 or 10 minutes. It's practically a torture for many people. One of the Zen koans is, what is the face you had before your mother met your father? And so, what is your unconditioned self, your unconditioned I, nature, whatever, consciousness? Everything else is conditioned. Everything else in us is given to us. Our body is given. Our thoughts we get from our parents, our education, our media, our environment, our opinions. We are given in a way we don't really think actively about them very much usually. Our sexual life is sort of programmed into us. We have that, it's given. And we go about our life. Nothing is really our own. It's been given to us. I was born with it. I didn't make my body. I didn't choose my being sexual or male or female or whatever. I didn't even choose my opinions when you really come down to it. I somehow adopted them passively or something. My interests, where did they come from? But there's one thing that is my own nature, and that's what this is. The original face is a symbol of that. That's something which we call I, really I, not the socially conditioned I that we're talking about, but my attention is my own thing. The only thing in a human being that is truly my own, that is not conditioned, is this quality called attention. What I give my attention to is truly voluntary. So it seems not sometimes it's being tried, but if I really try to look at myself and look at this thing called attention, I have a choice there of giving it to you or to give it to him. So I think it's in that direction is the original face. And that is not subject to the kind of time that everything else is subject to. It again takes us back to this question of presence, to be present, to be in the now. Every day now people are talking about the now. It's a big fashionable thing, and it's definitely a piece of a great truth, but it's only a piece. And the now is sometimes taken as rather limited, and it's just now here, but it's a much bigger thing than I think people realize, even from reading good books. So the original face is connected with all those things. It's connected to the question, who am I? Who is this being that calls itself by my name? Who am I? Am I Jerry? Am I Joe? Am I American? Am I woman, man? All those things, yes, but who am I? And that question is what I call one of the great questions of the heart, the great human question. When that question is asked as a mental puzzle, it's not very interesting, it doesn't do much. But when it's a question of your heart and of your whole being, who am I? I often think of these, from this kind of question, of this very common phenomenon of people who are very successful or very subject of great adoration, or very movie stars, big movie stars, or athletes, or great political figures. How difficult it is for them to realize, to think that people are loving me, attracted to me because I have money, because I'm sexy looking, because I have a reputation, because I'm a good baseball player. And they're creating a phantom, and I'm falling for it. And I have to live up to that. And I don't, it causes great unhappiness, I think, to someone like a movie star, like a Marilyn Monroe or something, and who plays the part and looks the part of a alluring person, and people love the image of her, the screen image. But she must have felt, does anybody love me? And then say people who are very wealthy, for example, people who are very, very, very wealthy, very rich people come very soon to realize that it's very hard to have a friend, because most of the people of my friends have hoping to get some money from me, get something out of me. So they stay with their own rich friends who each have that problem in a way. Not everybody. I know many people of great wealth who are not so much like that, but you know how it is. And it's true, we have an image that we have tried to cultivate ourselves, and has been put upon us too. The professor, to this kind of thing, you're the director, you're the movie star, I'm the authority. There's an image that goes very deep in us, which we're constantly looking around to protect it. Don't come near that, don't threaten that. I mustn't lose that image. Now, at the same time, there's a despair. That, who am I? People don't love me. They just love my image. They like me. They respect my image. And many of us go through that without really questioning it. But then we suffer like hell. But we don't really question it because we're constantly trying to affirm the image. And anybody that comes near threatening it, watch out. And even a little bit of hint of that, and I'm on my guard to protect that image. But then, as we say, these moments appear. Death. My father dies. My mother dies. I appear. In the moment of grief, deep grief. My mother has died. My father has died. I have now appeared. It's not negative. It's sorrow in that case. It's not emotional. It's not egoistic. It's a sorrow that is deep hurt, but I'm in touch with my real I. I really am. Now that turns later into fear and into self-pity and into regret and resentment and all kinds of bad emotions, but for a short or long period, in the moments of grief, and sometimes it lasts for weeks and months, in the moments of grief, I have appeared. Nobody can piss me off. Nobody can disturb me. Nobody can ask something too big or too little of me. I'm not afraid of the world. I'm not afraid. I'm capable of love. I'm capable of impartiality. That's remembering. Now, when the earthquake struck in, what was it, 1989? Yeah, maybe it was 1989. In San Francisco, we all got literally shaken and emotionally shaken. And I remember sitting in the chair, being thrown off the chair and staggering around while the thing was shaking. Everybody suddenly realized that the earth is moving and it's not stable and nothing is stable. Everything can be taken away. It was a tremendous shock and 99% of the people in San Francisco after that, for days, were walking around kind and friendly and open, not in a hurry, opening doors, being gracious. They really were there, so they were remembering who they are. They were no longer their image. They were no longer that. Slowly, after a day or a couple days, the image started coming back again, and they started being nasty and selfish, etc. So it doesn't last. But when you get shaken like that, you appear. And I guess they say, the image can be broken in many ways. When you risk your life to save another person, you don't even know that you did that. You just threw yourself in front of the person in order to protect her or something. And did I do that? That was more like me. That was more me than all the other things. So it shows us that underneath this complicated image, there's someone who just wishes the good, someone who cares, someone who's not naive. It's not naive, because you know at that point, you know sometimes you have to be clever, sometimes you have to be smart, sometimes you have to be tough. It's not sentimental, this thing. Sometimes you have to knock someone down, but you do it without personal image resentment. You can real hate is a property of a real human being, as well as real love. To really hate what is really evil, not what I imagine and what scares me, etc. So all of these are implicated in this question of remembering. And sometimes we are so touched by those moments, we ask ourselves, how could I live more in relation to those things? The only really good questions are the unanswerable ones. Theoretically, our sense of self is, our usual sense of self is basically a lie. It's deep down, it's something pretense. There's something that we're hiding. There's a wound of some kind in us that we're protecting, something like that. I think for many of us have a wound that was inflicted upon us emotionally when we were very young. And this image forms around it in order to protect it from being further wounded or imaged or injured. Sometimes it's caused by our parents or one thing or a trauma of one thing or another. And this image, or what you might call personality if you like, forms to protect it. And it's not me, but it protects me because this thing is there, hurts. And the protection takes all my energy, really. I'm constantly trying to make sure that it doesn't get exposed or hurt, this wound doesn't get touched. And if it does, then all the forces rush in to readjust to the ego, defends itself, reestablishes itself. And that's part of ordinary mental health. Otherwise, we walk around and we'd be basket cases walking around all the time. Because it's always some people are more touchy and sometimes less, but most of us are pretty damned sensitive. You hear the first letter of your name said 10 feet away from you and suddenly you're there. This image person, this ego is so sensitive. So this image or ego or personality, which sometimes serves a very good purpose and mustn't be destroyed, is trying to do something in our lives. It's been given a job to do, or it's taken on a job to do that it is constitutionally unable to do. It's taken on the job of making us feel safe, making us strong, protecting us, trying to care for other people, to love another person. It's trying to make us really intelligent, to have knowledge and understanding. But the knowledge, understanding, and the love that is generated by the image, or the personality, or the ego, is not fundamentally sound. It's not meant to be the master. And the body doesn't know any better. I mean, the body, the ego sometimes just pushes on the body and says, you must be like this, you must do that. or it indulges the body. It says, here's a nice thing for you, and it gets lots of pleasure and things. The body itself understands somewhere that this is a false master. It's trying to do something in our life that can only be done by the real I. The true I, the true self, when it appears, everything obeys it, everything respects it. The body recognizes, here's the boss, here's the master. I will obey that person. I will obey that being. The personality is trying to do the work that the real I should do. But the real I is hidden. So the personality is always trying to do these things, and we spend our time trying to accomplish all that. And sometimes we succeed, we become famous, we become successful, we become the star. But behind it all, there's, for most people who are at all sensitive, behind it all there's a haunting despair. It's not really mine, it's not really me. And it's very clear for many successful people, of different kinds, of course, and all kinds of people. They're constantly looking for affirmation of the image. And if you don't affirm the image, they're frightened and they hate. You can really get, and there are people who have to be affirmed all the time. No matter what, I'm looking for this affirmation all the time from you, from her, and one way or the other, whatever I say or do, it maybe sound like it's an impartial or noble thing, is always, I'm looking, am I to get affirmed? And that takes my time. That takes time. When the real self appears, it doesn't need that. It doesn't feed on that. It wants to give, and the whole organism serves it. So I'm putting things in a very black and white way, but that principle is there. The lie does not want to be exposed. But when the real self appears, the personality very often can relax and say, yes, okay, you're I'm making it dramatic, but it is. It's an extremely dramatic situation that we are in, because we are meant to be something so much greater than we think. The ego wants consciousness, it wants safety, it wants pleasure, it wants affirmation, all that it can get from the real self. It doesn't know that. How could it know that? And that's true in all traditions. Each tradition has that inner side to it. Christianity, I can show you texts, it's the same thing. Judaism, yes. Not maybe the Judaism and the Christianity that we're familiar with. Hinduism, we all know about it to the point where it's a cliche nowadays in certain circles, the true self, the Atman, the Buddha nature, all this things that people are sometimes talk very meaningfully about and are practicing it, and sometimes it's just an idea that circulates, it actually covers over the truth. So sometimes one needs an entirely new expression of this so that it has no echoes of the past in it. And that's what some of the great spiritual innovators have done. It's never been that they've invented a new teaching. They've rediscovered a new way to make the old truth available. The question about time, the relation between our ordinary life, our ordinary time, and this timelessness, where we're free from the aggressive, the predatory kind of time, which we usually have. The relationship between those two, the ordinary mind cannot really understand it, cannot understand when this other time appears. And the only answer to the problem, that question about time that is asked by us poor ordinary mortals, is the answer is not in words, it's in the experience of some timeless quality in ourselves. An answer is given not in words, but in experience. When you begin to have that kind of experience more and more, or even once sometimes, you know the answer. You know what this timelessness is. And you can put it into words and poetry and mystical language and so forth. Even the word timelessness is maybe sometimes just a label. You know that something is there, is given to you, that is different, has transformed you, has given meaning to your life. This is meaning that has appeared. So again, I can say all kinds of things about the cells in the brain are activated that I've never used usually, I've never come in, or you can express it in all kinds of God has entered into the mind. Different religions have said it different ways. The Buddhists say it in another way. So what I'm saying is that there are questions that can only be answered by experience. And so the next question would be, how can we work for the experience of this timeless being? And that's a question of what is a genuine inner discipline? What is a genuine inner work? I think that's a very central question. How to live one's life so that when I'm more at the disposal of these moments that can enter into our life. And there is a work toward that. There is a way. It requires help from people who have come along that way more. It requires other people who want to share the work with you, share the way. You can express your difficulties and what you have understood and verify it with others. So you begin to, first of all, now to need what I call philosophical friends. People who have the same kind of interests, who have this kind of attraction to something beyond the world of appearances, beyond the world of breakfast, lunch, dinner, money, children. People who have that yearning that Plato called eros, which is almost a nameless impulse to connect to something greater, not in a sentimental religious sense of any kind, but to just know somewhere this can't be all there is it? And when you have friends like that and you come together with them, sometimes it attracts people who can help you. Because the people who can help exist, I'm quite sure of that. And they're waiting to find the people that they can help. There's a very beautiful passage in the Buddhist scriptures called The Day in the Life of the Buddha. And he describes how he lives, goes through his day, and then it describes how he goes to bed and he goes to sleep. And it says something like he prepares himself for sleep, prepares himself to lie down in the special Buddhist lion's posture, I think it's called, of sleep on his right side. But before he lies down to sleep, it said he casts his Buddha eye around the world to see who has the great wish, and he draws that person toward him. And so there are beings out there who are trying. If you have the wish, there are people there who are trying to help. Not the false gurus, not the charlatans, not the people who imagine they're able to do this, but the real ones. And how we can distinguish between them cannot be explained. It has to do with something in the heart. But you can find people who are interested, and then there'll be things become clear. If I were to say rules and principles of how to do it, it would maybe be good for a day or two, but It needs something much more sustained. This is not just a mystical experience which suddenly transforms your life and everything is meaningful. That's a New Age fantasy. It takes hard work and serious intent and understanding and a critical mind, which is very important. A normal, everyday, critical mind that's ready to say, I don't know, what you're saying sounds interesting, but I need more evidence. Not show me, but not to be gullible. This is relevant to all we've been talking about, because the two enemies of finding help are gullibility and cynicism. They're two sides of one coin. The cynic doesn't believe anything is possible, anything is good. The gullible one believes everything he hears. So as my old teacher used to say, it's important to have an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out. You asked the hardest question of all. When I was writing my book, I put the same question to people, including someone who was preparing the national budget under the president many years ago. And he said, I'd be damned if I know. So it's a very difficult question. There are easy answers, like it's a measure of value, or it's a promise. And that's a little bit more interesting as an answer, because what it represents is a question. What does it represent? What's behind it? It's a means of exchange. It's a means of people living together and dealing and exchanging with each other material things, and sometimes emotional things, and all kinds of human elements being exchanged with money nowadays. But originally, I believe, it was invented as a piece of social technology, a very great invention, to help people realize their independence, or interdependence, dependence upon each other, and share common aims and common goods. So it served, I think, if not a spiritual, at least a very deeply human function, and from the earliest times. So it's a token of exchange. It's a convenient way of value, of exchanging goods. Instead of carrying a cow, you carry a coin, all that sort of thing. But it's such a difficult question. It has so many different aspects to money. It's an emotional thing just as much as it is a material thing. And we'll get into the subject of what is the meaning of money in a deeply human life. So I have no one answer to the question, but when you really ponder what is money very deeply, you get into such interesting questions that the question itself becomes more interesting than any answer you might give, which is true of all the great questions of life. Really, as a philosopher, I believe that a deepening of a question is much better than a quick answer, because when you really deepen a serious question, you open up a part of yourself that is more valuable than anything else. It's, first of all, what I've tried in all my books, because I was deeply interested in spiritual thought, philosophical spiritual thought, the teachings of the great religious traditions of the world. And it's a long story there, but I came to see, and I'm fairly sure of this, that all the great spiritual traditions in history point to the same truths, the same realities, and the same values. And so I became very interested in that sort of fundamental system of thought that's behind all the great traditions, what some people have called the primordial tradition. But when I started to write books, I discovered that really what I want to explore is the question of whether these great teachings behind all the spiritual traditions can throw light, illuminate the concrete, everyday, gut-level problems and questions of our own everyday life in this culture, in this world, in our day-to-day lives. So I've been looking for a bridge between this vast, wonderful, inspiring, transcendent system of teaching, of ideas, and the questions of our everyday life. And so each one of my books had that kind of a question. And having written about psychology and medicine and science and education of a kind, of sort, I realized that the money question was really one of the, if not the most troubling, gnawing questions, aching questions of our time, of our life in this culture. Because money in this culture has entered into more aspects of human life. Our lives have become more monetized and commodified than I believe any other culture ever. Money is in everything, enters into everything. Everything has become market-driven in some way or other, or defined, almost everything. Things that used to be part of just human exchange without the money entering it now cost something, and what is billed for it. And you have to face the money question almost everywhere you go, wherever you are, with your children, with your life, with your profession, with your living and dying. So, what does it mean? Why is it so important? What is its real importance? So this became a question. I had never seen it treated in any book or study. What is the meaning of money in our lives? Now, there are books treatises that do speak about it a little bit, and sometimes very deeply, but they're not the ones that anybody really knows very well, very much. That was in the late 1980s, when we were such a sick, big, materialist culture. That was our main problem, in a way, really. So I said, that would be a really interesting question. What is the relation of money to a human being in a human life that is searching for meaning, for its inner development, let's say? What place should money have? And it took me 2 years to even write the first sentence of that book, because I couldn't start thinking about it. I said, this is really a great question, but there's been no other studies. Everybody writes about money, to how to make it, how to keep it, where to distribute it, how to spend it, et cetera, but nobody would place money like that in any realistic way. Yes, there were sentimental things, money's not important, but all that was not real where it is. Then, so there was a movie, not a very good movie, that I saw, a friend of mine helped make, called Waterhole Number 3. It just disappeared from the universe, justly so, but it had James Coburn in it, and he was a good guy, an adventurer, etc. Anyway, he's running away at the end of the movie with some gold, that gold bullion. He's being pursued by all the other people who think it's theirs, the Indians and the army and various individuals with shotguns and bows and arrows, and he's racing toward the border to get from Mexico into the United States. This is the last frames of the movie. As he crosses over the border, he turns around and looks at the camera, and he says, the problem is with money that we take it too seriously. And then he turns away, and then he turns back to the camera and says, no, the problem with money is that we're not serious enough about it. And that was a very interesting thing to say. And that's what I found at the theme of my book, was how to be serious about money. Serious about money, give it the seriousness it demands and it deserves, without being swallowed by it. And that's really part of what we need to understand. So I came to the conclusion, after thinking and writing about it, because sometimes one writes a book having a question without knowing the answer, and uses the writing as one does in teaching to try to think about the question. And I've made what I consider a great discovery about what the meaning of money. And that's based on the spiritual idea it's in many of the great traditions, that we human beings have two natures, two sides. We are spiritual, there's a spiritual divine element in us, and there's a material body and material needs and worldly activities that are absolutely essential as a part of our life. Raising a family, creating things, doing good deeds, etc. Many other things. That is our life in the world. We're born into that world. We must act in that world. But we have this other side, which comes from another dimension, actually, you might say, which we are born also to open up in ourselves. We're not born with that. We are born with it really there, but we very quickly get closed off from it and live our life without contacting it. And if we don't contact that part of ourselves, that spiritual inner higher consciousness, you might say, higher energy, then our life becomes simply lost in outward things. And what are in themselves are not evil, but they're only one half, or a little less than half in a way, but say one half of our nature. But the other nature, if that isn't developed, life is meaningless. So our aim is to develop and to live fully and give each side of ourselves the attention it deserves so that it can be balanced and I can live a life where we have this inner world which is then manifested in action. Money represents in the contemporary world, the modern world, if not maybe even the principal means of organizing one half of our life, the material outward part. That's very important. For better or worse, money helps us to organize how we live nowadays, this outward part. But it doesn't give us anything of the inner world. With money, you can't buy the inner world, but you can study yourself very well. How you act with money is a big key to how all the hypocrisies and all the problems we have. That's a big key to our values in the world. And when you have knowledge of yourself, that is sacred. Knowledge about ourselves is sacred, even though what we know about the money is not itself particularly sacred. So I felt that, in that sense, money is one of the great keys to self-knowledge in our contemporary world. If you want to know yourself, as one great teacher once said, observe how you are with money, sex, and time. So I wrote 3 books dealing with money, not sex exactly, but love and time. But money was the first one. Then those 3 things. So that's the answer, long answer to a short question. I'm not a historian, but it's so difficult to sweeping generalizations and to have the myths we have about the Middle Ages and the myths we have about the modern world. But so how to say it? The medieval world that I'm speaking about had with many things were horrible about it, but it had a religious, in a good sense of the term, a religious underpinning. The Christian church, the Catholic Church, the Christianity was still sort of somewhere behind things. It had corruption, it had all kinds of things, dogmatic, but there was a living Christianity in the Middle Ages, and that helped to determine values, even if they weren't always lived up to, or often lived up to, because the Middle Ages was very violent in many, many ways. The modern era, and then you had this transitional time where something more of the world, the horizontal dimension of human life became, they say, the Renaissance, if you like, or the humanism that the human dimension, and there was a kind of different take developing about God and religion. The human dimension began to be explored. It wasn't anti-religious exactly, but it was more the human side, the worldly side, the side of where scientific discovery, which had existed, of course, throughout history, and in the Middle Ages have tremendous science, but the scientific revolution, the philosophical enlightenment, starting with great philosophers like Descartes and Hume and finally Immanuel Kant, and the whole Enlightenment humanistic revolution, which put religion in a different place and sometimes questioned it and sometimes denied it altogether and rejected it. And as science developed and humanity began to discover its power over nature in a way that never could have been dreamt of before, perhaps because it wasn't even wanted before. It wasn't so important, that kind of power. And so that, even though the fathers, the originators of the scientific revolution, people like Newton and Galileo and Kepler and other great scientists were spiritual people. They weren't materialistic in any way or reductive particularly. Science was a noble enterprise with Newton and others. It was to try to discover how God operated in the world. Newton was a very spiritually inclined human being. He was thinking, this is how God does these things. But then there came a time when something turned, when some people began to think, well, if that's, now we know, beginning to know how God does things, that's how I'm going to act when I become God. And people began to feel their own power. Science gave them power. And that was the beginning of something that was certainly anti-religious, non-religious, that began to be permanent, current in the modern world until we got war, religious war became more obvious. There's so much to say in this subject, but it became to a point where religion looked like something which science was opposed to, and science looked like something that threatened religion. It doesn't have to be that way, but that's the way it became. So to put it in a word, materialism, even of a very refined sort, became more and more dominant, and the church and religious doctrine and dogma began to occupy only a part of the human adventure, and more material realities became important, and the scientific explanation became defined by how it can reduce all questions, all unknowns to their material dimension, and explain things by reducing it to physics and chemistry and non-purposeful, non-conscious, non-soulful realities. So I haven't said it very well, but it's in that dimension that money became somehow, through technology development and through making the world function more as a better machine, money became part of oiling the machine. That things could be exchanged, material values could be worked on, money could be if you had a world that was operating on, say, very time, a certain kind of great discovery of how to synchronize time throughout the world, how you can make time go very, very predictably through quantification, through external measurements, say the clock, which is a great invention of the modern world, and that's the modern timepiece. Then business became a huge force in the life of humanity, where in the Middle Ages there was business, but not this kind of world business that started to take place. Now, I'm just going through sweeping generalizations here, but it's in that direction that one aspect of this must be understood. There are plenty others which I can't think of right now, but we're in a world where somehow spiritual, inner, even aesthetic values do not seem as real as the values associated with money. And that's one of the great questions of my book. How did it happen that money seems so real? Why is it that the word bottom line means that's what it really is? And it is, in a way. When you have money involved in a relationship or in a situation, it becomes more real. I can talk to you, we can make great plans, we can like each other, we care for each other, etc. But when I ask you can you loan me $1,000 or something? Well, something is, no, maybe you can and will, but there's another reality appeared. So money makes things real, for better or worse. Why it does is because our feelings and our passions associated with money and what money can buy are stronger than the feelings of our inner life. So our inner life seems not as real as our life with money. This is, again, wildly generalizing it, but my reactions to money, for many of us in our childhood, where money difficulties were so important for many people, that we were sort of brought up. By the time we were conscious young men and women, money was critical in our thinking and our feeling. So money became so real, but in itself it's nothing. It represents something, but in itself, what is it? As they say, it's only paper, but it represents something very real. It's a promise. And when the promise is broken, chaos assumes, as we have seen nowadays. The promise of money, that I give you X dollars, that's worth something. And when it stops being worth it, or let's say inflation or something like that, there's chaos in the world. So it's very important that we keep money in a stable way, dynamically stable. But no one knows how to do it. No one really understands what's going on right now. A lot of very brilliant people write about it. But the emotional element of money has not yet been taken into account by economists or anybody, really. Money is emotion. I can do a lot with money. And money is necessary. Money is good. If you use it in a good way, it can do wonderful things. I was in a conference once with about money at a university, and in those days there was still now, many young people had a kind of contempt for wealthy executives and things. Oh, the head of Exxon or something, bad. But the man who helped me the most to understand money, the businessman I write about in my book, he said a very strong thing, which I quoted in the book. He says, in order to do anything good to help mankind, you need the help of wealthy people. You need money. You really do. You can't really save the whales or the trees, or you can't help starve poverty. You can't do anything unless there's money to take care of how to do it. And there are many really thoughtful, intelligent people who do have lots of money, who would like to help and are helping. So one has to recognize that there are things that money really can buy, and very, very good. And therefore one needs to respect money and not to be devout. So how to have money without being had by it. That's my, in a sweatshirt motto. How to have it without being had by it. Power, tremendous power. And the people who have lots of money are as puzzled by it as those who don't. Nobody knows what's going on. I'm not talking about today, but in general, like I said, the person who was helped with the United States budget didn't really know. It wasn't just joking. It didn't really know what is money, what does it come from, what's it do, what's it for really, what can it buy? Money can buy lots of good things. It can, not just comfort and luxury, it can buy friendship of a certain kind. It can't buy love of a certain kind, but it can buy some kind of love, and I don't mean cheap things. I mean the things that are, I can, if I have money, I can make a gift that really expresses my feeling towards somebody. It's not nothing, but what is it? It can't buy. It can buy. One of the most interesting things I faced in the book was the realization that, there are almost no problems in our life that can't be solved, at least temporarily, by a specific amount of money. Oh, no, my relation with my mother is... Now, just think for a minute. If suppose you had 20 times as much money as you have now, how would it help? Yeah, I can see where I could do this with her. So there are certain, almost nothing. There are things that can't be bought with money, but many more things can than we imagine. And that's not being materialistic, because money doesn't mean just material things. No. Oh, but there's one thing money can't buy, in my opinion. And I'm putting again another bumper sticker. Money can buy everything except meaning. Meaning comes from the two natures being in balance, your spiritual inner side and your outer life. And that money by itself can't buy that, but your relationship to money can help you develop your relation between the inner world and the outer world. Let me say then that this is how I see it. You can study yourself, which is, for me, a key to spiritual development. The path that I think is of great value starts with self-knowledge. It goes knowledge of how I am in my everyday life, this part of me, and knowledge of this other higher part. And the knowledge of my everyday psychological, personal patterns and traps and failures and self-deceptions and etc. can be revealed by studying, among other things, by studying how I am with money. Because how I am, to study how I am with money is very difficult and very revealing and very humbling, because you see you are not what you think you are with money. And so that becomes a source of self-observation, as it can be called. And just not to do anything to make it, but just to study. Somebody, you see somebody at a party, looks like an ordinary schmo. Everybody's talking, somebody says, you know who that is? He's a billionaire. Suddenly my feelings toward this person, oh, really, nice looking man. You go up to him and get to know him. Maybe you think money will pour down from him to you or something, but your feelings change. If somebody is rich, it makes a difference to you. It makes a difference, and it makes a difference to them. They don't know what to do with it either. People who are wealthy very often, who have inherited it particularly, they can be wonderful people, and some of them are very unhappy, like movie stars. If they're not brought up in a certain way with lots of money, I've known many wealthy people, they don't have any sense of why people care for them except for their money. So they become a little paranoid, a little lonely, looking for people like themselves who have lots of money. But so having lots of money is not necessarily a key to. It's a joke. Yes, I could stand it. I could bear it. Give me a couple of million and I'll be able to bear it. But it's so we have to see how the emotions are related to money. And they're deeply related. And economists who try to speak of the rational economic theories, rational, I think it's all totally wrong. You have to really deeply understand human emotions in order to understand money. Ad people know that a little bit, but on a cheesy way. But it represents something deep. So self-knowledge is what I'm talking about. Money as a key to knowing yourself, and it's hard to bear. You try to, an exercise I give, and sometimes is people, I ask the class, when I public lecture, or workshop, I ask the participants to go out in the street and use $1, $1. Now maybe it should be $5, but give $1 to the first person you see. Not a homeless person who's begging, and not someone selling, but just go up to an ordinary person in the street and say, "Would you like $1?" And you'll see how difficult that is to do it, but also how difficult it is to receive it. The person will say, "What are you doing? What is this? What's the catch?" And it's a very interesting exercise to see how you are with money. More interesting for many people, not everyone, is to keep a strict budget for a week, to just by every penny to write down. For many people, that's hard, it's hell. For other people, do it automatically, but most people, and it shows you what you value, where you spend your money. What you toed it up at the end. What you spend your money is where you've given your values to, one way or the other. Sometimes you have to, but. So all that is part of the spiritual dimension of money, self-knowledge. It's absolutely true. Absolutely true. I like to think of myself in a certain way, but when the money thing appears, I manifest against what I think I ought to be. It's always interesting what happens when someone leaves a lot of money and they die, and how it tears most families apart. Or just sitting at the dinner at a restaurant, a nice restaurant with a group of friends, when the check starts arriving, and to see whose hand moves just slow enough, just fast enough to be respectable, but slow enough not to be the first one to reach for it. It's very, but of course there are generous people who reach for it. But on the other hand, it is a dance sometimes of who's going to pick up the check. That's a very trivial example, but these trivial examples show us something about money. There are laws to money, too. There was a nice book long ago by Michael Phillips called The 7 Laws of Money. Michael Phillips, I think it was. And I think there's a lot of truth in some of what used to be considered new agey. But, when you give money away in a certain way, it seems to grow back. It's very interesting about giving. There was a beggar on this downtown San Francisco. When I used to go down Union Square, he had no legs. He was just sitting on a rolling platform with a cup. A nice-looking man, obviously had a decent, intelligent face, just sitting there holding out a basket or cup, I don't know what. And very often people would walk around him. In our culture, people are made nervous by beggars of any kind and walk around him. And so I went across the street, and I must confess I walked around him. And then a block down the street, there was a pet mobile. Save the cats. It was for cats. Dogs and cats, but I think mainly cats were at the thing. This woman was writing a big check for cats. And a block down the street, there was a man without any legs. Now, maybe I'm being sentimental, but I felt, couldn't she at least have done half that check to the man with the legs? So what are we afraid of? And I'm like everyone, my first reaction is fear. So I went back and I salved my conscience by giving the man without legs some money. But that kind of thing, to try to see that, to be present in yourself while you watch how you are to money, is like a rich harvest of self-knowledge. And people want to borrow money from me, then I become very often a very different person. And I have to see that, not necessarily become better, but just see it. And another thing, of course, is to really try to look at your childhood, your first experiences with money. How was it with your family, with your parents? Some people had wonderful, generous parents, and there wasn't a problem, but nevertheless, almost everybody has something from money in their childhood that determines something about how they are later. What your mother said about how you should earn something, or your father said, or whatever it is. It's very deep. I used to gather money as a kid, you know. When I was a young little child, coins were hugely important. And I remember, this is silly, I remember how a dime was such a powerful thing. Because with a nickel you could buy an ice cream cone, you could do it. But a dime was twice as powerful as a nickel, but it was twice as small. And I couldn't understand how can a dime, which is so much smaller, be so much more powerful than a nickel. So I didn't really grasp that money represented something. Then I had an uncle who would come, who I loved. He would come and he'd give me half a dollar. Half a dollar was like a mountain. He just gave it to me. I couldn't grasp that generosity. Later on, that became a standard of generosity for me because what he gave was something so big to such a small child. So generosity is a wonderful trait. Profligacy is not. And so all those things correspond to personal traits. And if we want to know ourselves, we need to study all that. And money is a golden key to doing that in this culture. Let's talk about greed.
Let's talk about greed. Yeah. I mean, are we just inherently greedy, or is...
No. How would you define greed? Greed is wanting more than you need, or taking more than you need, or taking without any measure. Like, for example, when I asked one very successful businessman, when I was writing the book, and he must have been, in those days, hugely wealthy. He must have been worth at least $500 million, I would say, which was much bigger than it is now. I said to him, and he was still involved in money. He's an interesting guy. He interviewed me. How much is enough, I asked him. His jaw dropped. He said, yeah, you know, I never thought of that question. I just make it. So people say, just don't make it. Maybe that's greed. On the other hand, in a culture like this, in economic times like we are in and we have been in for a long time in a way, how much is enough? You don't know. It could fall apart at any minute. So there has been this kind of culture of just keep making it without trying to decide how much is enough. Now, many people now, the revolution is appearing, are trying to say, it can't go on. There is enough. I don't need all that. That's beginning to happen in the margins of the culture. People are saying, so I don't need all that. Look at all this stuff here. We all have stuff. Are we all greedy? We have much more than we need. Is that greed? We're not greedy. In that sense, it's not like somebody twirling their mustaches and getting, but there are greedy people. There are, but what is it? So, when a bank executive who screws up royally gets paid $75 million for leaving when he leaves, and maybe complains that he should get another 20 or something, that's greed. But just to know what it is, though, is sort of percolated down to our culture much more than just with very big rich people. I had a friend of mine who's a very developed, wonderfully interesting man, and he is he's a carpet salesman, and I asked him, what does he do? What does he do? What is he good at in his life? It's an exercise I give sometimes for writing workshops. What do you do well? And he said, I think he's a good carpet salesman. I said, all right, now what's the most important human characteristic in being a good rug salesman? And he thought, and he said, greed. And I said, okay, write a little essay about greed. So he wrote a beautiful little piece about how he is when he sells a carpet. And it was greed, but in a way, around the edges, he was so aware of what he was doing. He was so aware that he was being greedy that it lost a lot of its toxicity, a lot of its poison. So to be a vice, a pattern of human behavior has to be unconscious, mechanical. And when a person is consciously greedy, in a way, it takes some of the poison out of it, because when you're really conscious of what you're doing, it operates against it becoming really deadly and hurtful too much to someone. So my take on greed is it's a totally mechanical, conditioned, unconscious hunger for more, for more, for more, which is, a lot of us have in many different ways. Food. As a child, I learned to become greedy about food. I would take more than I need. My mother would say, your eyes are bigger than your stomach, that kind of thing. And I said, and she was right. So, I'm sorry, but it's touching on deep questions here. How do you know what you need? What do you need? What do you have to be to know you don't need to have a pile of French fried potatoes? You just this much French fried potatoes or that much of a piece of pie is perfectly necessary, fine. After you eat it, you're fine. But no, you take more, some of us. Now, some of us are not like that. We don't eat enough, or we are. There's another documentary about food that needs to be done. Anyhow, food and money, I forgot about that. Money, sex, time, and food. We did the next one. So, in order to not be greedy, one has to be conscious of oneself, and that means to know my desires, to know what the body really needs or what my psyche really needs. And I don't really know that as I am really. I just desire. Now, I can go on because it gets us into the question of desires. Capitalist system that we know thrives on creating desires, not just it's one thing to satisfy needs. That's very pure and good, and not just material needs or food and shelter, but human beings are much more than animals needing food and shelter. Maybe they need art, maybe they need beauty, maybe they need refinement. That's not bad. We can go into that another time. There are needs that represent the transcendent parts of ourselves in some way, that we need to live not just by eating necessary food, but maybe we need to eat very good food, But then come desires. Now, usually what we need, we desire. Sometimes, though, we get so screwed up that we have many needs, but they don't correspond to what we desire. And that's almost definition of neurosis or even psychosis in a way. So desires, all right, so then money becomes an instrument for satisfying desires that are somehow there. But desires can be artificially created by the external world, by society, by culture, by imitation, and it becomes a real bottomless pit that what the spiritual traditions call the desire nature is bottomless. There's no end to the more you feed it, the more it wants. You can create endless desires, and that's what for a long time, since at least the early part of the 20th century, capitalism, or the American business, discovered, created, transformed human beings into consumers. We began to be called consumers. What a horrible title, consumer, and advertising and business discovered you can create desires. You don't have to satisfy them only, you create them. New desires, new toothpaste, new cars, new this, new that, to make people feel they're going to be happy. by satisfying the desires that we have created. And that went in bottomless pit to more and more, the creation of desires that bring pleasure up to a point. Maybe it lasts for a minute or maybe a month or half a day, but it always goes away, and you need more and more. And that became what our business system, our production system was rooted in that, and it still is. So this is an ancient teaching that the desire nature, is when that becomes the dominant thing, mental, psychologically, physical desires, then you're really in hell. This is a Buddhist hell. Then at least one of the lower worlds of Buddhism is symbolized by what they call the hungry ghosts, which I wrote about in the book. The hungry ghost is this phantom being with a huge belly and a little thin pinprick mouth and arms and legs that float out, and it's always looking for food to feed. The more it eats, the more it wants. The more everything it eats makes it hungrier. Not only that, it burns as it's going down. And that's almost like the definition of our economic system in that respect. We've become hungry ghosts. Children have become 30, 20, 50, 100 toys, one toy after another toy. The desires are desires. It's not the parents' fault, it's just the whole culture. So you see, it touches on the most interesting questions, inner questions, how to be aware of our desires and not attached to them so much, and so that we can be free, not to be a slave of all these impulses that are conditioned into us. There's another element in us, which is a yearning for truth and for being. That's not just like those desires, but it's a deep human need, and that hasn't been acknowledged in the culture at all. And now it's arising much more in people. Oh boy, Why Can't We Be Good is a book that really I would love to talk about. The American Soul is a book that now you're bringing up, and I'd love to say something about that. America, somebody said, the aim of America is to make the world safe for money. American business is a very big thing of America. American economic power. People come here. Immigrants come for freedom, economic freedom, to get ahead. They can't do they can't move socially, economically in their Europe the way they do here, or in Asia, but here all things are possible, in principle. That's one of the great things about America, was that people come here for this kind of freedom. I've talked to so many immigrants who particularly from Asia and Middle East, who you can breathe here. And one of them, a man, an Afghan, had a most beautiful statement about America: my mind is free. And we have no idea, we who are born here, what it's like to have an oppression against our mind, a tyranny over the mind, which Jefferson rebelled against, and all that. So we have become a money-driven, but the question is opening now a little more, money-driven as a nation, political strength, military power, a form of government that is really one of the great achievements of the modern world, is American form, the Constitution, the form of government we have, the democracy, the way it's formed, the way it's structured. It's brilliant. The Constitution, I believe, is a great, great achievement. To go into how it was formed would take us too little more, but beyond the pale. But as I come to understand America, when I started writing about it, and actually going to reading, studying men like Washington, or people like Jefferson and Franklin, and great American figures like Frederick Douglass, and and the Native American situation, what we did to that, and the Constitution, I realized that America is a spiritually defined nation in one sense, not Christian in the church sense, but it's a spiritually defined nation whose aim, whose strength, whose meaning is to make a safe place protected for people to, that people can come together and search for the conscience, to find conscience, that inner source of moral being, which is at the root of every spiritual tradition. And America's meaning is that just not just for people to come together and be free from church dogmatism and from civil injustices and from monarchical oppression. That's all good, but it's external. It's liberty. But freedom, the freedom of association that de Tocqueville admired so much, the freedom of people to come together for an inner reason, to find their own conscience and live by it. That is what America means. And it's losing it. It's losing it because it's being defined all the time by its external sides, really. And that's good. But liberty tells us what we're free from, but it doesn't tell us what we're free for. And America is free. Freedom means free to search inwardly with other people, have a community like that. To me, that is the meaning of America. And that was my discovery, writing about America, because I had no idea. I knew America was a problem. I had to find that bridge between tradition, spirituality, and the meaning of America. And I was scared to write about it because I hated American history as a child. It was so boring. But I saw that this really is what America, other countries can do that, have done that in the past too. It's just that right now America was the strongest country to protect that. In other words, its military power is only justifiable if it's protecting something important. If it's just military power for the sake of military power, it's not interesting. It's at the end, America's dead. If it's just economic power, just for the sake of being rich, that's going to go too, like Rome did. But if it's there still to preserve that inner possibility, then it's worth fighting for, I think. Other countries have something of those values, but America has this powerful place in the world where it can still stand and protect that. No other big major nation, I think, has that as its main value. Most countries don't have that. We do have an ability still to change our government if we have to, but Obama has given new hope. So we're all hoping that this is going to re-emerge. Most people with any sense know that that's not happening. 16 boxes of cereal doesn't make me happy to have that possibility. In fact, it drives me nuts. No, it's... See, we have a strong country in that sense of military and economic, although people now, it's obviously a weak economically, but it's still strong. The world still needs America. Who would take our place at this point? But Thomas Paine made a distinction between government and society. Government is strong, military, it has armies, it has police, it can punish, it can do damage, it can do bad, has to do bad things sometimes. No government can exist and be a saint. People expect America to be like a saint. America, a nation is not an individual. A nation is like a big machine that has a function. And people can't expect a nation to be always nice. A nation's going to have to do, maybe even do crimes sometimes. But a nation is there to protect society, which is a softer, more humanistic thing, where people can relate to each other in a certain way. And society doesn't have armies, but it exists protected by a government which does have armies. So we have to make that distinction. America, as a nation, is there to protect the society, people, the liberty of people, the freedom of people. to find what is true. Now, not everybody has to undergo that search, but unless that search for the inner conscience is undertaken by a number of people in this earth, that's going to be the most dangerous, destructive thing. It's hard to say what's normal about money, how to be normal about money. Let me put it that way to start with. Do I know anybody who's normal about money? No. Everybody is weird about money. You find everybody has some quirk about money. Mostly, some of them haven't discovered it, but they do. So I don't know if money is intrinsically abnormal or not, but so let's start with that caveat. All I can say is the work of studying how I am with money will normalize how I am with money. And consciousness is the great, awareness is the great normalizing force. The force of human attention directed impartially, warmly toward myself and toward others is a great beneficent force that's not been understood till it's now beginning to be understood some places. So I would say the most healthy thing about money would be to really become conscious of it, how it is, how it works in oneself. So I can't give any specific things, but everybody needs money. I know, let's face it. I do things for money. I try not to compromise what are my values, but sometimes one has to do things. I can't answer anything more than that.
Yeah, no. Any last words at all? Just your perspective on, since, what was it, September 2008, with the economic collapse.
Oh, about that?
Mm-hmm.
If only I had X, then I'd be okay. That's what everybody feels. Some people did it, and they're okay, quote. There's always, life is full of that. I think everybody is frightened, everybody's confused. We hope there's somebody up there that is a little less confused. I think some bold efforts are being made. Nobody knows whether they're going to succeed. But the most important part of it, to me, is what I hope is not going to be spent, not going to be dispersed, is the sense of trust somewhere in the leadership. Obama's victory was a great victory for some, in the sense that people were feeling there's now someone I can trust. It's being chipped away, but not necessarily very much. It's still there's a huge bank of trust and hope in this man and what is around him. So I don't say that we should trust something or someone that's not trustworthy, but the crisis will not disappear until trust returns in the country. And people think that things have to get better so that I can then trust them. But the other arrow goes the other way too, maybe even more. It's that when I start trusting them, they will get better. So let's try to trust without being naive, without being foolish. Let's try to trust that the country has really risen to bring someone into leadership who nobody ever believed would be able to get there. So this hope is still there. That's my last word on the subject because it echoes the famous lines of the saying of the great Islamic saying, which is echoed in the Jewish tradition too, is trust in Allah, but tie your camel first. So let's trust, if we can trust, but still make as many smart moves as we can and watch your you-know-what.
Hey, just before you go, if you want more relaxing stuff, you might know that I wrote a book, 7 Habits of Calm and Happy People, and now I even made an audiobook version. It's the best habits that work for me for being more calm, more at peace, and I think you're gonna like it too, so you can find it for free as a gift at findcalm.com/book. Findcalm.com/book. Check it out.